I'm joined now by Rachel Maddow, host of The Rachel Maddow Show, whose award-winning podcast, Ultra, is now in its second season, and I've been gobbling up every episode of that. Rachel, just your thoughts. I remember talking to you the day of oral arguments when we did a special, and I think everyone's reaction to that was, whoa, are they going to do this?
Yeah.
We got our answer.
I remember talking to you about this, Chris, the day they chose to take it up. I mean, the decision to take it up itself was so gobsmacking. And I'm generally a glass half empty kind of person. I always see the cloud before I see the silver lining. But even when they took it up, I remember you and I talking about the radicalism of that decision in itself. Because when the district court, the first level federal court, ruled on this issue, basically the rule was, duh, of course the president isn't immune. When the appeals court then looked at that and reviewed that decision, it was a unanimous, absolutely bulletproof decision from that appeals court where the bottom line was essentially, duh, of course, no, a president can't be immune. So it was gobsmacking when the Supreme Court took it up. But I remember talking to you that day, and in my glass half empty kind of way, I thought, well, even under the worst case scenario, it's not like they're going to decide that he's immune. It's just outrageous that they've taken it up because this will allow for months of delay and will effectively give him temporary immunity before the election. And once the election happens, if he wins, he makes all the prosecutions go away anyway. I really did not expect that they would do this. And they, Donald Trump and his counsel asked for this 100% absolute immunity thing, which was insane. I would say they got 105% of what they were asking for. They got immunity from this court, despite some of the language in Justice Roberts' ruling saying that there was some measure of humility here, some measure of restraint. The practical impact of what they have done is to give Trump immunity that even he and his counsel did not ask for. And given that the hypotheticals over the course of these arguments, as you rightly pointed out, included things like, can the president assassinate a rival? I think we have to look at the Supreme Court's affirmative answer to that. Yes, you can. With as much seriousness as it deserves. I mean, this is a death squad ruling. This is a ruling that says that as long as you can construe it as an official or quasi-official act, you can do absolutely anything, and never be held accountable, not only while you are president, but forever. And this is a president who has activated pro-Trump paramilitary groups that, wear insignia and T-shirts and hold placards celebrating literally right-wing death squads, right? This is a president who has talked about absolutely using the Justice Department to go after his rivals. This explicitly immunizes anything the president wants to do through the Justice Department, but all but explicitly justifies anything the president wants to do full stop to anyone. And that is as serious as it gets.
I'm 100% with you on that. I want to stay on the Department of Justice thing because obviously, and there's reason why, in those in the hypothetical offered by a federal judge in the appeals court arguments about SEAL Team 6, and then talked about in SCOTUS, and then in the decision, why that has had such significance, right? But that is a hypothetical. It hasn't happened in American history. What has happened in American history is a president, Richard Nixon, using the Justice Department, the IRS, all kinds of faculty. I mean, he had the IRS audit his political enemies. He attempted to use the Justice Department to go after his political enemies. That's not a hypothetical. That's just American history. And coming out of that, and you're someone who's been a sort of historian of this period for a lot of reasons, there was a conclusion that Watergate was wrong, and that what Nixon did to the federal government was wrong. And one of the readings of Roberts today is Watergate was not prosecutable, maybe, and what Nixon did as president, he probably was immune for, and too bad that John Roberts wasn't around in 1974.
I mean, the executive sort of the imperial executive idea pioneered by Republican Justice Department officials like Ed Meese and brought to its sort of governing apex under Dick Cheney and the kinds of people who worked in Republican politics to approve the sorts of things that happened, particularly after 9/11 under the George W. Bush White House. Those have now been brought by bringing a bunch of people who were part of that cultural milieu in the legal world, by bringing them into a supermajority in the Supreme Court. That has brought us to a place where a president has had his lawyers asked by a justice in open court, are you saying your guy can assassinate someone and he will have immunity for that? The answer was yes, and the court wrote it down. And that answer is the logical, apex of where those things are. It's the nadir, I suppose, of where those things go over time. But to have that radicalism land when you have a potential next term of Donald Trump on the horizon if he wins in November, where he is saying exactly what he will do with this power, is quite a remarkable thing. You'll notice that nobody in reacting to today's ruling is saying, wow, how scary, what is Joe Biden going to do with this power? Right? Nobody is saying that. Nobody is worried that a president like Joe Biden is going to, abuse this in such a way that is going to bring about a de facto dictatorship. But because that is what Trump is explicitly promising for any next term that he wins in the White House, and this conservative court knows it, and a third of it was appointed by him. They're doing this in the full context, the full knowledge of the radicalism of what they're bringing down upon the country. And the only solution to this, the only way out of this, is to have non-criminals and non-authoritarian-minded would-be dictators win presidential elections. Yeah. That is the only way to fix this, because if you have somebody who is a criminal or is authoritarian-minded, when they get in there armed with this ruling, there is nothing they cannot do.
On that final point, the prospective implications of today's ruling are more profound in some ways and more unnerving than the retroactive ones, because I mean, about the trial. And we're going to talk about this. What does it mean, actually, for the case that Jack Smith has, which is still alive, we should note, which I think they can cabin enough of this to bring that. We'll see and talk about it. A little unclear. But the symbolic meaning, to me, is almost as important as the legal meaning. For the reasons that you say, what it says to Trump, what it says to Republicans, the joke I made today was like John Roberts pulled down the American flag, turned it upside down, and hoisted it back up over the Supreme Court. It felt to me like the opinion was like, we're with you on this. Over and above its findings, its holdings as a matter of constitutional law, its sort of communicative aspect.
Yeah. I mean, if the president, when Donald Trump, running for president in 2016, started leading crowds in that "lock her up" chant, as shocking as it was to most of the country, it was a transgressive thrill to Trump and his followers, because they knew it sounded so wrong. But they enjoyed that transgressive thrill so much that it became policy. And we know that Trump, in fact, tried to get his Justice Department to bring improper, politically motivated prosecutions against people while he was president, and indeed to improperly exclude him from federal investigation in the case that ultimately resulted in state court in his 34 felony convictions in New York. So we know that he is very, very facile with this. This is what he wants to do. This is what he thinks power should be. Who's my Roy Cohn, right? And now the Supreme Court has said without reservation and without limit, yeah, you can do that. We promise you explicitly in the ruling, in the language of the ruling, not even in a footnote, anything you say to your Justice Department is subject to immunity for you. And that is, it's the rule of law means in this country that the law is not used as an instrument of the ruler. The rule of law is supposed to constrain the ruler. And the Supreme Court just undid that, and it's binding, and it's now the way our country is structured. And the only way out of this, The only fix to this, there's no fix to this that involves impeaching Supreme Court justices. There's no fix to this that involves a new argument or a new case. The only fix to this is to put someone in the White House from here on out who will not abuse the absolutely tyrannical power they have just been legally granted in perpetuity.
We are, as I said, expecting the President of the United States to issue an address, to give a live address today from the White House in response to the Supreme Court ruling, something that's extremely rare. That should be happening just in a little bit. We'll, of course, bring that to you when that happens. I want to bring in Joy Reid, whose hour this is, and I'm sure has a lot to say about today's momentous 6-3 decision from the Roberts Court. Joy.
Hey, Chris. Yeah, it was something to read today, both the decision and the dissent. And I guess the sort of best way for me to kind of sum it up is, I don't know if everyone here watches Game of Thrones, but if you're a Game of Thrones fan, you will note that in Westeros there is a king, and then there is the hand of the king. And when the king is very young or very old or very mad, the hand of the king is effectively the king. And what I think you saw in this ruling today was the Supreme Court declare their preferred president, of course, because they know no Democrat would exercise these powers in the way they would very much like their next president to. They've declared the president and former presidents to be kings. But they've also declared themselves the hand of the king. This is the key part I just want to read. This is from page 110 from the dissent. This is from Ketanji Brown Jackson's dissent, Justice Jackson. With its adoption of a paradigm that sometimes exempts the president from the dictates of the law when the court says so, this court has effectively snatched from the legislature the authority to bind the president or not to Congress's mandates, and it has also thereby substantially augmented the power of both the office of the presidency and itself. What John Roberts said today is that he and his 5 fellow Leonard Leo appointees will decide when the president has erred. They will decide when he has stepped beyond the bounds of official acts, and only they can make that decision. They are the hand of the king. And the last thing I will say is that they repeatedly call for boldness and decisive action, that we need to see boldness and decisive action, and that only absolute immunity and presumed immunity can give a president such boldness. One wonders then how previous presidents have figured out how to implement the Trail of Tears and force indigenous people to march along with enslaved people across this country, mainly to their deaths. How President Lincoln essentially deleted the human property, $10 billion worth of human property from every state in rebellion by fiat. How presidents, let's talk about the presidents in the 20th century. Harry Truman unleashed a nuclear holocaust on 2 parts of Japan. He did that boldly and decisively without fear of prosecution. How then does a new president, a future president, need such boldness to come from the fiat of the Supreme Court?
Yeah, there has been no lack of boldness and decisiveness from American presidents and executives through the years, particularly when operating in the conduct of war, particularly. Andrew, I think this has been a shocking trajectory for you, particularly as someone who knows the law quite well and the Department of Justice. What was your reaction to today's?
Well, I definitely agreed with Rachel that I just did not expect that there would be 5 votes for this. This is a watershed moment, big picture. Just want to make sure people understand, with respect to the Department of Justice, on pages 20 and 21, the decision makes it absolutely clear, even if there is a known sham prosecution, that is off limits. If you have a president, let's say, who is on tape saying, bring a false prosecution, cannot prosecute. No matter how strong the evidence is, and this is not a hypothetical, because you actually have people talking about it right now about weaponizing if they get back into office. So that part it's just so anathema to the idea of a rule of law when you're talking about a Department of Justice that the whole principle is to be separate and independent and not be have a norm of not, in fact, obeying what the president says you have to do.
I think the whole piece of this where the legal intersects, actually collides violently with the political, is that in 2016, Trump was you could go back and say maybe there were other reasons to run. In 2024, that's not the case. The only reason he's running is for retribution. And the only way Trump defines retribution is official. He wants to use official acts.
Yes, that's right.
And so for
He doesn't
Trump,
want private retribution.
forget about the league,
Yeah,
right. Forget about us. Forget about the Free Press's analysis of something that the justices actually wrote down and put in writing, which is that we do now have a king. That's radical and amazing. But we also have a guy running for president who is today ahead in the polls, who is running to take official acts to seek out, in his words, retribution against his political enemies. He is only interested in the official parts of the job. And he only ever was. I mean, the only reason he wanted a Roy Cohn, to pick up on Rachel's point, is so that he could have someone architect the White House around officially seeking out punishment for his enemies. 2017, there was a story in the New York Times that he wanted to prosecute Hillary Clinton. He fires Jim Comey because he doesn't, quote, see to it to let Mike Flynn go, let Mike Flynn go. He only ever wanted to commit crimes disguised as official acts.
Yeah, I mean, I think he said this publicly 1,000 times, to Nicole's point. And I was reading today, if anybody's following along, on the lovely Project 2025 plan on page 560. This is the first line of that part. The next conservative administration should embrace the Constitution and understand the obligation of the executive branch to use its independent resources and authorities to restrain the excesses of both the legislative and judicial branches. This is the plan that Steve Bannon has been holding up in his recent interviews, before he went to jail today, of course, to say this is what we're going to do. And the justices, what they did today is basically, I mean, I worked for two presidents, Nicole worked for a president. You haven't needed this immunity in the past. There have been bad things that have happened under presidents. I'm not, but like they haven't.
But they've done the bad things even without.
They've done the bad things even without. Nobody's walking around waiting for the immunity. The presidents I worked for didn't look for the immunity, and now you have the person. So you're asking the American public, to Rachel's point, to vote for people and trust the presidents they elect will have the morality and the benevolence to not abuse. That's essentially what they're doing.
So the very bad news for Donald Trump in this decision today, and for candidate Trump, very, very bad, is that Mike Pence is going to walk into a federal courtroom, raise his right hand, take an oath to tell the truth, and testify against Donald Trump in this case in September. It's going to happen much faster.
You're saying it's an evidentiary hearing.
Absolutely. So what this is we've created an absolute immunity on one paragraph of the indictment, applying to exactly one paragraph of the indictment. All of the rest of the indictment goes back to Judge Chutkan's courtroom, and she schedules this. This Supreme Court has ordered her to have a hearing about the evidence in the case to determine whether the act in question is an official act, whether it might have some kind of protection or not. And that's for everything in the case except for one conversation that he had with the acting attorney general.
The Department of Justice.
So what you're looking at here is basically there'll be some briefs on each side, and then the judge will schedule a day and say, OK, we start today. Mr. Smith, who's your first witness? And it's exactly like a prosecution. And for what Jack Smith's going to have to do, and sometimes in pretrial evidentiary stuff, prosecutors don't want to turn over all their cards. He's going to have to turn over every single one of them, because the Supreme Court has said to him, in effect, we need to see every single one of your cards. So every witness he has, he's going to bring into that courtroom. They're all going to be under oath, and the defense is going to be able to cross-examine them. The defense probably won't bring in any witnesses at all, but you're going to see this incredible January 6th hearing on steroids, possibly for 6-8 weeks, September, October, maybe.
Quickly, Andrew, do you think that's going to happen?
Yeah, I'd always thought the sort of silver lining, but it's a small one, because the big picture here is this decision is horrendous for American democracy. But Lawrence is right. There is going to be a hearing, and the Supreme Court has actually said there has to be. So, and obviously there's going to be a lot of fighting about the timing of it, but Judge Chutkan does not have to wait the 81 days that she said she would wait for the trial. This is a hearing, so she can have briefing and she can set up a hearing with witnesses are called.
Joy, just before we go to break, there's also to your point earlier about the sort of clarity of this or the stakes. The one thing I was thinking about, too, and this is Rachel's point, is just how clarifying this is about the stakes of the election. To the extent there's some activating small d Democratic energy that can be brought out of what I think is a genuinely appalling move by the court. I wonder if you feel the same way about that.
It's very clarifying. They might as well have added, by the way, please Google Project 2025, because we are essentially authorizing, and not just authorizing, really sort of calling on Donald Trump. They repeatedly talk about bold and decisive action.
Yeah.
But what bold and decisive action do they have in mind? Probably the exact same bold and decisive action the Heritage Foundation has in mind. Heritage Action has in mind. Leonard Leo has in mind. Steve Bannon has in mind. And what I think they're saying to the American people is that if this Leonard Leo 6, get our preferred president back, we are going to encourage him to break the boundaries of the law, to push it to the limit, to feel free to even use violence, to use mass incarceration. Go ahead and do those camps. Do whatever you need to do to take the bold and decisive action that we repeatedly have said is necessary for the function of the presidency to get the agenda done. And we'll protect you, and we'll let you know, Donald Trump, when you've gone too far, and only then will you be stopped. This is a clarion call to every American. By the way, that debate is like 34 felony counts old, and it does not matter anymore. All that matters is that you do not allow the person back into office who will use this power that he's been given by this court, this imperial court, to implement that agenda they wrote down and published because they know that no one will stop them except voters. It doesn't matter if Biden is old. It don't matter. It don't matter if he's old. What matters is that the other guy wants to be a king, and this court has said, yes, you are a king, and we are the king's hand, and together, the 7 of us will rule this country.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.